Hello, everyone, and welcome to the December 9th episode of the LGS Pod, the Soccer Shorts companion podcast where we highlight topics that impact our local grassroots soccer culture here in our hometown of San Diego, as well as across the U.S. and around the world. I'm John Cross, founder of Soccer Shorts, and with me tonight, as always, is our co-host Dylan Wilson. Dylan, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing well. It's it's that time of year. It's like the Friday of the year, so I enjoy December very much.
Yes. I did not get a chance to follow up on the Champions League scores from earlier. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but how did Tottenham do?
Yes, they
today?
did well in the face of, homophobia from the Slavia supporters. It was a pretty routine 3-0 win. There's some other good games, though. Chelsea lost away in Bergamo to Atalanta. And then that Barcelona-Frankfurt game was really good as well.
Yeah, I missed pretty much all the matches today. I was busy with some other things, so I didn't get a chance to even check in on the scores here before we started. So, but I did happen to catch what you were referencing there about the flag having to be moved, which I don't want to get too deep into that, but that's another whole podcast we can do on that stuff. But pretty sad state of affairs. That that was even an issue to have the flag moved in the first place.
I will say though, I think it's kind of a funny anecdote about the way this kind of like outrage kind of culture permeates through society and how it's not really like a productive thing ever for anybody. The actual material result of the Slavia fans saying we are too homophobic to not cause a scene if you don't get rid of this flag was that the flag was moved from inside the away section where only the people around it would be able to see it to the exact opposite corner of the stadium where they could all see it now. And so it almost was like now it's in your face and you can all see it instead of it just being there for a couple people to like have to, I don't know, control themselves, I guess. But it's just kind of funny. It like goes to show, or I think it's a funny little anecdote. You know, the bigotry didn't actually get them anywhere. They had to stare at the flag the whole time while they're getting their butts kicked. So,
and that's, and that's good. The fact that it had to be moved in the first place, it was even considered.
Yeah.
And all around the guise of safety. Mm. I mean, so we're protecting the people who are threatening violence.
Yes.
And vandalism, because they can't, as you said, can't control themselves. It's just, like I said, that could be a whole other podcast topic on itself. But good to hear that. I knew it got moved, but good to hear it was still in a very prominent place. And, even though it was technically moved, it was still there for everyone to see. So that was good. All right. Any other news from since our last episode before we jump into tonight's topics?
Well, I don't know if it counts as news, but a lot of fuel has been thrown on the Mo Salah to San Diego question.
Yes.
With all the drama this past weekend in and around the Liverpool camp. So I've seen that really hot up again, but I still don't think there's really any news there.
Yeah, I don't think there's any news there either yet. I mean, maybe, who knows, something might happen later, but I agree with you. I really don't think there's any news to it other than hope by a lot of people because of what's happening in Liverpool. But yeah, I just don't even see it being remotely on the table, especially looking at the roster that SDFC, who they kind of announced is returning and who maybe might not be returning. I think it further goes to show this right to dream model and where they want to focus their energies.
Yeah.
So again, as I said in last week's podcast, even if he's available, I'd be really surprised if that was a direction they went.
Agreed.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's go ahead and jump into tonight's episode. we're getting close to wrapping up 2025 here. And as we do, and we look towards next year, 2026, obviously we have the Men's World Cup coming up in the summer. And as always, when a World Cup comes to a country, people look at, especially the US, look at what kind of legacy it might leave, especially because what happened after the 94 World Cup. We had MLS get started and really kind of started our modern footballing culture, I would say, with a professional league that's been around basically since 96, and other semi-professional, or I guess now professional leagues in terms of USL, and now a stable women's league in the NWSL. So one of the things we thought we might do tonight, especially in our at least current off season until MLS does their calendar change, we're getting all the off-season talk and off-season moves, and there certainly is a lot of talk about salaries, salary caps, worker compensation, all these kinds of issues that are coming up in all our professional leagues. So we thought we might take a dive into looking at what are some of the professional standards, not so much in the way of ownership and getting a team in Division I, Division II, or Division III, but professional standards in terms of working conditions for players. So we'll dive into that and look at each of the leagues and some of the issues that they're dealing with towards the second half of our show. But in the first half, like we always do, we'll catch up on some news, and there certainly was a lot of news this last week. But before we get even to that news, we'll jump in with our fairly regular segment we've been doing to kick off the show, is this day in San Diego sports history. So we're not going to go too far back for this one. Actually, just 2023. That's it. Usually we try to get something a little more historic, but as we're pulling things together to dive into San Diego history, sometimes we'll do something a little newer like this, but keeping with our college soccer theme, just 2 years ago, the women's team at Point Loma Nazarene University became the NCAA Division II national champions. So a week before, we highlighted UCSD when they won their women's championship. So Point Loma Nazarene 2 years ago won the women's national title in Division II for the NCAA. They defeated Washburn University 1-0. The game-winning header by Emma Thrapp in the 53rd minute. And throughout the tournament, the Point Loma Nazarene women's team didn't concede a goal.
Wow.
So quite a dominant run through the tournament, culminating with their first, at least on the women's side. I don't know. I didn't look deeper onto the men's side or the whole history of Point Loma, but their first women's Division II national championship.
Very cool. I did not know that.
Yeah, and that's, again, I think, as you mentioned last week also, I think Point Loma flies under the radar quite a bit here locally, even in terms of colleges, and they have consistently had strong soccer teams. So we'll have to keep an eye on them. And unfortunately, we highlighted their men's team had a game on Saturday. They were in the final 8. They lost in a golden goal situation. So in the first overtime period, I did not make it out to Point Loma for the match, as we talked about. I said I probably wouldn't. But I did catch it. I caught, I guess, most of the second half. I didn't catch the first half. So most of the second half, and then the overtime period where they eventually lost. And it was too bad because they came from behind twice to level it and then level it again and send it into extra time, but couldn't pull it off in the overtime period. So I'm guessing you probably didn't make it out to Point Loma for the match.
I did not, no.
Yeah. And then I guess if we're sticking with college soccer, just a quick shout out to Florida State, which won the women's Division I tournament, beating Stanford last night. We had several San Diegans on the Stanford team, so I was kind of pulling for them. but Florida State was able to win that, and they have become quite the dominant women's soccer team and powerhouse over the last few years, especially on the East Coast. So we've got Stanford really here on the West Coast and Florida State on the East Coast. And looking probably over the next few years, looking at how deep their rosters are and the underclassmen playing for each of those teams, that they are both likely to be strong for quite a few more years.
When the NWSL did away with the draft, right? I don't know if I'm
Correct.
remembering correctly. So that, kind of creates a more player-friendly space insofar as their decision when they want to go, professional. And I understand they could, enter the draft whenever they chose prior, but it just gives them a little more control over that. And that's good.
Yeah, and then with the USL Super League as well, there's another opportunity for players to get in there and play, because we do have, I don't know, more than 300, I think, Division I women's college teams in the U.S. Quite a few. There's a huge player pool out there, that if we had some more teams at a pre-professional and professional level, could allow a lot more players the opportunity, instead of that big jump maybe between USLW for people who maybe just still want to play, to the NWSL or
Right.
USL Super League, right? So, but let's bring it to some more San Diego news here and look at the Wave. San Diego Wave, yes, they are in their off season, but they just participated in the World Sevens out in Florida, and they won it over the weekend. I don't know did you catch any of the matches, Dylan?
No, I did watch some highlights though. It was fun. I like those kind of small-sided tournaments, like the soccer tournament. I think similar idea.
Yeah,
and it's fun.
Yeah, it's 15-minute halves, running clock. It goes really fast. I guess their only scare, I guess, for the Wave was in the semifinal match where they was it semifinal? Yeah, I guess it was a semifinal match. Where I think, if I remember, it was 0-0 at the end of regulation. So they go to sudden death penalty kicks. Like there's no 5 or anything. It's just sudden death. So the Wave made theirs, and the other team did not make their first penalty kick, so it was over. And I wasn't expecting that. I mean, you're used to watching penalty shootout, and you're going to go through multiple kickers, but that was it. It was over right away, and then they took it in the final. One of the things I thought was interesting was that there was a $2 million prize for the winning team. I think there was $5 million total or something, but $2 million for the winning team. And I have no idea what this means, who gets it. Are there bonuses for the players and they're splitting it? Does something go to the team? But $2 million in terms of the NWSL is some serious money, because the salary cap for the NWSL is $3.5 million. That's more than half of the salary cap right there for 5 games for a weekend tournament that they got. So I'd be curious. I don't know if they will ever share exactly where that money went, but I'd be curious to know how that money is split up and what goes to the team and what goes to, I would hope some of the players who participated got some kind of bonus.
I would unfortunately be willing to bet a frustrating amount of it went to the league and not the players.
Well, that is a problem, because the NWSL, like Major League Soccer, is a single entity organization. So yeah, there probably is a bit of it that went back to the league, since there were only 2 league representatives. That is probably the case. And we'll jump into more NWSL stuff when we get into talking about player salaries and salary caps and stuff a little bit later in the episode. But in terms of, again, some San Diego news, it's the end of the year. This is the time when lots of groups are doing their players of the year and different voting. We've seen the results come out from a lot of our professional leagues. But U.S. Soccer's extended national teams are doing they have the nominations are already out there, so they have voting, and 15% of the vote actually comes from fan voting. So it's split up in a variety of ways. But for the men's deaf national team, there are two San Diegans who are up, Chris Borden and Raul Silva. So they are two of the three players. So if you know either one of those, I think Chris might play locally on one of our UPSL teams. I can't remember. Maybe Raul, but they are both San Diegans and they are up for Player of the Year. And you can go over to the US Soccer website and get on the extended national teams page, and the ballots are there. And you can go vote for one of those, or I don't know how many times you can vote or if it's open, but I want to give some love to our local San Diegans who are representing the U.S. at a national level on the men's deaf team. I don't know if we have any other San Diegans for the other national teams. I didn't have time to look deeper into that, but I know at least for the men's deaf team, two of those three candidates are from San Diego.
Nice. Very cool.
And then I don't know if you caught it, Dylan, the CONCACAF Champions Cup draw happened at 4:00 our time. I mean, we go live here for our podcast at 6. So we know the opponent for SDFC. It's going to be Pumas in round one. And that should take place. I know they have 4 weekends set aside in February. I don't know how it works exactly. I know it's going to be a home and away competition for each round. It's knockout each round. So SDFC faces Pumas in the opening round in February. So we'll have a CONCACAF Champions Cup match at Snapdragon sometime in February. I don't know who's hosting first or how the rankings went through or what. All I caught was the matchup, and I'm not even sure the dates have been set specifically, but it should happen in February. So might actually get me out to Snapdragon for a match.
Yeah, that would be interesting. And you figure tickets might be a little easier to come by just because there's going to be a certain number of people who just won't even be aware that it's happening, no matter how hard the club tries to market it. For a lot of people, February just is not soccer season in the United States. So it won't even be on a lot of people's radar.
Yeah, and I hope it's well attended. I hope they get a lot of people out there. I don't know if it's going to be part of their 2026 season ticket package to get people. I would imagine it's going to be a separate ticket because you don't know how far you're going to advance in the tournament. And I agree with you. It probably will not be as well attended, but that's a shame to me because I think their success in their first year in MLS earned them this berth, and now you get to play internationally on your continent, for some higher trophies. And to me, this is when people, not that they shouldn't show up for league matches, but this is a big game. And,
totally fair. And I'm not saying that people don't care. Or that people, I'm mostly saying I think it just won't pierce a lot of people's veil of what they're paying attention to in February of 2026, right? Because they're not used to looking at US soccer in that time. But also, imagine you are just a casual sports fan in San Diego who has come to SDFC, not because you're a soccer fan, but just because they're the new club in town. And there's, the Padres and the Wave are the only other really top flight pro teams here. You might not know that there's international club competition. That might be something
right.
you're completely unaware of, because that's just not something we really do here in America. And SDFC, if you were paying attention to the MLS writ large, it would have been hard to not notice that some clubs were playing in these weird tournaments that SDFC wasn't. But if you really just paid attention to SDFC last year, there's no reason you would notice that other MLS teams were playing in these continental tournaments. And so I guess this is a long way to say, I'm not hoping that it's poorly attended. I just think there's probably going to be, this is a unique first time round situation where you're going to have a lot of these newer fans who literally just might not even be aware that this is not a preseason match, right? Because that might
Right.
be how they
Yeah.
think of it. So unfortunately, it's just one of those things where it'll take time for the. I mean, I don't want to say soccer culture because there's a rich soccer culture here, but the culture of like organized club competition in the world as it stands right now is going to take a little time for people to develop that understanding here.
Yeah, I agree. And this actually making it into the CONCACAF Champions Cup has implications for the Open Cup, and we're going to talk about that probably in about 10 minutes here.
Sure.
But it does have implications, and we'll, like I said, talk about that. But because this is MLS, I also wanted to. I don't know if you saw it. 615 Soccer is the group, which is like independent soccer media for the Nashville area. And they, for the last few years, have put together an MLS fan survey. So, not done by the league. This is done by other people and other independent journalistic groups also pitch in and help. So, as part of the survey, like if you picked SDFC and there was someone local who helped out, there would be separate questions specifically regarding SDFC. So it's one big general survey, has some general questions, and then we'll springboard you off if you select a particular team. And I don't know if you saw the survey results. I looked through it. I always think it's interesting to see some of these that are geared specifically toward fans, but come from independent sources rather than come from the league. And there weren't too many things surprising. I don't want to dive too deep into the entire survey, but what I do want to highlight is of the 3,500 responses roughly that they had, not a single person identified as an SDFC supporter. So I know we had mentioned on the podcast that it was out there to, go check it out, give your input. And I don't know, we're going to have to talk to our friends over at San Diego Punto Football and see if they can get this on their radar for next time around, and they can be the San Diego sponsors of this bigger survey and start putting out some questions, since they certainly are more well connected with SDFC and SDFC fans than we are through their podcast. But I was a little disappointed to see not a single person, so yes, it is. I think the Sounders might have had the most people who participated, but you certainly had a lot of people from Nashville, and the New York teams, because of the different groups that have helped contribute to making the survey. So I really feel we need to put the bug in the ear of our friends over at San Diego Punto Football to make sure next year they're involved with this, because it would have been nice on my end to just look and see through and see what San Diego fans were thinking about some of these questions, switching the calendar, just big league-wide things. And then, each team had their own more specific targeted questions that they wanted to do. So it was disappointing not to be able to see anything for San Diego.
That's fair. But I also think it's, again, another one of those things where it's just the team is so new. The fan base is so new. Even longtime soccer enjoyers might not really be plugged into like the day-to-day nuance going ons of the U.S. soccer space, right? Which you would pretty much have to be to take a survey like this, right? And so those are just the kind of things that it takes time for those tendrils to kind of develop into these people. So yeah, I agree. There's definitely a marketing problem probably, but I also think it's just one of those things like, after the first year of Loyal, granted COVID, but, I was like very interested. I wasn't all in yet, right? It takes a little bit of time for people to really become a sicko.
Right. Yeah, well, I agree. It does take some time, and I know I am because I take the time to look at all kinds of things that are going on around all the various levels of U.S. soccer, and I am a sicko in that sense.
We are the
certainly,
sickos, yes.
Certainly not like everybody else, but hopefully we can turn some people onto the survey for next year. And continuing with MLS, because we just had the final, And Don Garber always does a state of the league kind of thing, usually around the All-Star game and then again at MLS Cup. Um, I don't know if you caught this. Someone asked him a question with the calendar switch. Is there talk of promotion relegation? Did you happen to catch his answer,
No,
which was
no.
very different than he has given for the last 10 to 15 years?
I make it. I have a personal rule to like ignore Don Garber. So no, I did not see that.
Yeah, that's also fair. Um, I mean, there was nothing to read into it of anything like I would say in the previous 6 months where there were clear indications that this calendar switch was on the table and was coming. It was just a matter of time. There was nothing along those lines. But he basically said something to the effect of, you know, who knows? Like if it makes sense, and I've learned in this to never say never, kind of thing. And he said, I never thought we'd switch our calendar. And that was probably the most, I don't know if I want to say honest, is probably not quite the right word, but um, came off as a sincere kind of comment like, well, it it might happen depending how owners and everybody else feels if it makes sense. And again, I would not argue that it's coming anytime soon or really on the table, but it sounds like it was not a shut the door down, it won't happen kind of thing, which is, I would say, really what we've heard from the league for 10 years, easily,
I mean,
before the calendar change.
I can't really say I'm that surprised by that. I mean, we've talked about this on the show that I think MLS's long-term goal is to, dominate as many markets as they can, right? And they have to at some level. Like as much as I don't like these people, they're also smart people, and I'm not going to pretend they aren't. And like smart people will realize that at some level, like having only a top flight league where it costs 500 million to like even have the rights to start paying a bunch of money to have a team, like will exclude most markets in the country, and that opens a door for an MLS or some or a USL, excuse me, or something like that to have space, even if it's not a dominant space, right? And so I think if MLS wants to dominate the full landscape of US soccer the way MLB does with MILB, I think really the only logical end to that is some sort of pro rel system, even if it's fully internal, right? Which I think
Right.
is probably what they'll more edge to. But yeah, I guess it is a little surprising to hear that kind of from like a narrow view, but from like a 30,000 foot view, it's very not surprising because again, I just don't see if MLS wants to keep expanding, which they have to because I recognize as an oversimplification, but in a way, the expansion fees represent a Ponzi scheme like structure for the MLS. I'm not saying it is a Ponzi scheme, but there are parallels, right? So expansion will have to keep going. And I'm not saying like expanding to like Grand Rapids for a third division club is going to bring in millions of dollars necessarily, right? No shade on Grand Rapids. That was just the first like mid-tier size city I thought of. I'm sure it's a lovely place. Never been. But my point more just that like if they want to keep expanding their footprint and their market domination, pro rel is almost like necessary. So fuck Don Garber, but I guess I'm not upset to hear that.
Yeah, and he will be leaving soon. So,
Right. I thought
and
I'd
so
heard that. So that's confirmed he's stepping aside or
I would say this is one of those things that if you hear him speak and what he's said again, kind of over the last 6 months, sounds like this current contract is going to be his last. And because they keep talking about transition programs and transition teams, I find it highly unlikely that he will stay again, renew his contract for another few years. Who knows? Again, like he said, never say never. But I would imagine that at this point in time, and I think this is going to carry on to our conversation in the latter half of our show today about professional standards for players. I think we're at a big pivot point in terms of U.S. soccer and where we're going. So I'll say part of those comments a little bit later for that. But I do think we're at a point where things are changing. MLS is going to be changing. They're going to go through leadership changes. Um, so yeah, I think we're at an important inflection point. Where it goes, don't really know. But I think there's kind of a lot of things potentially on the table over the next few years.
Well, that's kind of interesting because I remember, well, I don't remember exactly when it was. It would have been pre-COVID, but I remember a conversation I had with somebody where they talked about how, as much as you don't like Don Garber, when you consider like the broad history of MLS, you have MLS 1.0, which was like just survive, right? And then
Right.
you have MLS 2.0, which really was more of like kind of a real estate venture with some soccer teams attached
Expansion.
to it.
Yeah,
Right, but stadium focused expansion. And
exactly.
like for all of my ill feelings towards Don Garber, that was a very smart play. It worked really well. It really established the footing of the league, not only in terms of relevance, but in terms of like financial stability. Um, but this same person I was talking to, I don't remember who it was, so sorry to them, pointed out that there will come a time when you need to switch to MLS 3.0, and Don Garber won't be the guy for that. And MLS
Yeah.
3.0 might contain some things like ProRel or this calendar switch that you would have never expected 10 years ago under MLS 2.0. And so I think it's kind of interesting to see, 5 or 6 years later, to see that really playing out in front of us now. Don Garber's been very successful, but I think his model has taken it as far as it can go. So I'm no MLS fan, but I'm eager to see if maybe they make some pivots I would find favorable in this next era.
Yeah, anything that gets them closer to the way the rest of the world does it, I am in favor of
Mm-hmm.
because, right, and they get stronger, I think, as a league every time they get more in line with the world's game. It's taken
Agreed.
them 30 years to realize that. And and again, I agree with you. There were other issues at play in the first 10 years, the first 20 years. But I think they are at the time really where a lot of those guardrails and training wheels can come off. But in light of looking at the world's game, let's pivot now to the World Cup. I mean, we did have the draw last Friday. I don't really want to get into the circus that was the draw, but with the draw happening, there have been some other key pieces of news that have come out that I think got overshadowed by the circus that did happen last Friday. And one of those I don't think was I don't remember if it was announced on Friday or not, but if it wasn't announced Friday, it was very soon after news started to trickle out. But this idea of the hydration breaks for every match. Have you heard this?
I have, yes. That actually was the second most important piece of news that came out of Friday, though. I don't know if you saw this, or at least in my opinion, I don't know if you saw this, but it is now the official position of the United States government that NFL should change the name of their game. That is a big
Yes.
development. National Hand Egg League. Well, no, that won't work because then the NHL is screwed. So I don't know. That's going to be a whole thing. No, I joke. I know you were trying to stay away from the clown show, but I just couldn't not bring that up. Because here's the thing. If anybody, like literally anybody else had said that, that would be the new like right-wing outrage talking point. But because Trump said it,
Right.
we all have to pretend that it's, well, it is a good idea. Stop clocking all that, but whatever. Anyway, yes, I did see the hydration breaks. I don't know. It's kind of funny. It's a good idea. It makes a lot of sense, but I do think it's one of those things where it's the advertisers are creeping their way in. Like I saw an article today, like, oh, the hydration breaks are going to be used for quick cuts to commercials, and it's like, I see now why FIFA's all of a sudden
Well,
so on board with this.
but I mean, it's not just hydration breaks. They have said it is in terms of player safety, which is, you know,
Sure.
cover for
Yeah.
making money because they are supposed to happen around the 22nd minute and they are supposed to be 3 minutes long.
Yeah, that's a commercial break. That's a quarter.
It's a commercial break.
Those are quarters now we're doing here.
Right. So exactly. And since we a lot of times test things out at major tournaments that eventually get adopted, whether it's rule changes or other things, Like, are we seeing the beginning of the end of 45-minute halves? Are
Yeah,
we
I think
very,
so.
very quickly running towards 4 quarters for soccer?
Yes, I think we are. IFAB, the International Football Association, well, I don't remember what it stands for. They're the people who set the rules, right?
Right.
They have been trying to do the whole 60-minute game with clock stoppages for like a long time now. That's the thing they've been like not pushing for, but like, oh, what about this time? And yes, I think we absolutely are starting to move towards a system where they can use commercials all the time. I mean, you remember like 20 years ago, that was always the joke. That's why soccer will never catch on in the United States. There's no pauses for commercials.
Right.
And here we are creating them.
Yeah, I am certainly not happy about this because this absolutely is getting us to a quarter system
Yeah.
that we are going to have, even though it's going to be super short and a quick ad break. And, they say it's for safety, but you can't tell me that every advert or every broadcaster is not licking their chops for another 5 ad spots that they can do. Because as soon as you realize it's a water break and you take your 10-15 seconds to get out to commercial break, you got 5 ad spots there. And then you come back in time to get ready to start. Yeah, I'm not happy about this. Um, you know, I have no problem with hydration breaks, but scheduling them and having a predetermined time, no matter whether the game is played during the day or at night, I think we are very, unless there's a big pushback, we are very quickly moving into. Um, I could see MLS adopting this right away. Like, great, more ad breaks. But we'll see. I don't know. Certainly not happy about the hydration breaks. But there are 2 other things that kind of came out from all of this that I found interesting that kind of flew under the radar. The second one is I don't know if you were aware, Seattle obviously is one of the host cities, but because the scheduled matches that they were going to be hosting fell on the same weekend, I think it's a Saturday match, fell on the same weekend as their Pride Parade. They had already labeled that particular match was going to be a Pride event that they
I
were
did
hosting.
see that. And it's what, Iran versus Egypt or something like that?
Iran versus Egypt. And I was speculating last week, I think, on our show that because FIFA left them some wiggle room, I was wondering if a team like Haiti or Iran that whole group might be shuffled. They might do some shuffling and have them be in Canada or Mexico instead of in the US, just because of the US policies in terms of tourist visas. But yeah, Egypt and Iran, and I immediately also today with the events that happened at the Tottenham Hotspur match, with the complaint leveled that, we want you to take that down. Like, I could see the Egyptian national team or the Iranian national team or their maybe not the players necessarily, but their organization saying, oh, hey, like, we need to take those down so there wouldn't be any problems. I'll be very curious to see if Seattle sticks to their guns and makes this a Pride match, because that will certainly be a story. I really hope they do. But then the cynic in me wondered, like, oh my God, I wonder if they force things around for it to be Egypt and Iran to be that match. Which I don't think, the way they do the draw and everything, I don't think that was really quite possible. It's just the way it worked out. But I think that's an interesting storyline to see with both our federal government and Seattle, and the stupid shit our president says about moving games for safety reasons. It'll be interesting to see how this one plays out there.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of the opinion that it's too late to be moving games. Like, even if Trump wanted to, like, And I don't mean that like, oh, it's too late, like you really shouldn't do it. Like, I mean logistically. Like people have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on tickets already, probably, or will be doing that. You know,
or
like
hotels or any,
right, the
like, yeah,
logistics are in place. Like it's not as easy as just like actually it's in Houston now or wherever, you know. So I remain skeptical that that will ever happen, um, or that the game will get moved. I mean, that said, I think it's really fucking funny that it's two like well-known, you know, countries that have well-known kind of barbaric laws about homophobia or about
right.
homosexuality. At least I know Iran does. I don't know for a fact that Egypt does, but I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. It seems like a fairly safe assumption, that they're
I
not,
believe they both do.
yeah,
Yes.
have pretty barbaric laws about that. It's funny how all these people told us in 2022 that we have to respect the host country's culture and, you know, kowtow to their homophobia, and now all of a sudden they're not respecting our culture and respecting our acceptance of other people's ways of life. It's very like thinly veiled homophobia. It always has been. It's just really, I guess, brought into extra Hippocratic focus just because it's like literally 4 years ago, you know, we all had to endure watching people get like arrested for wearing rainbow shirts because quote
Right.
unquote respect the culture. Um, so I think it's super fucking funny that those two countries got picked for that, and I hope they go through with it. But I also remain confident that even if FIFA pulled some shenanigans and like undid the pride, whatever, Seattle would show up and make it like the gayest fucking World Cup game, no matter what. And so I have
I hope so.
undying faith in the people of Seattle.
Yeah.
Even if they're not in the game, like it's going to be pride flags all around the
Surrounding.
stadium. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
even if FIFA pulls some shit with that, I remain a believer in the people of Seattle.
Yeah. I hope so. I hope they, it is their Pride weekend. Celebrate
Mhm.
it just like you were planning to do the entire
And
time.
Seattle, I mean, I love Seattle. Don't get me wrong, but like there's like the Seattle scowl, like like Seattle mean, like that's a thing. Those people don't play around if you piss them off. So, you know, you have been warned, Johnny.
So again, story will follow. The last one from this and something I saw in the last couple of days, and I'm really surprised it's taken this long. And in my rush to get some things ready today, I didn't quite catch the name of the group, but there is a group who has filed, I think they're out of the UK, filed an ethics complaint specifically against Gianni Infantino with FIFA's ethics committee. So I doubt, you know, well, I don't know. Part of me doubts anything really happens with it, but I would imagine there's an awful lot of people with this Peace Prize that no one else outside of Infantino really seems to have had a say in terms of the organization. UEFA has been at odds on all kinds of things, the Club World Cup and other things with FIFA. That I don't know. This I could see something here generate some momentum uh, if it's, I don't want to say done right. I'm not sure what the words I'm looking for, um, but I could see maybe some other complaints fall through, and it might be the opening for some people to get rid of Infantino at one of their
Well,
meetings. But FIFA's so political. Yeah, we know the history of FIFA and how things have worked and how factions form and promises are bartered back and forth in order to get something. Who knows what will ultimately happen if there ever is any pressure to remove Infantino.
I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if some other high level FIFA officials saw this as an opportunity to do a little coup or something. You know, they're all sycophants at that point when you get to that
Yeah.
level of it. So I wouldn't put it past them. I don't know. They're all terrible though. I wouldn't expect. You remember when was the last guy?
Sepp Blatter.
Yeah, when Sepp Blatter got arrested, everyone was like, "Oh, thank God, the next guy can't be worse."
Yeah.
It's worse. He's
It's
worse.
worse.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's switch from the World Cup to our, back to the US. And already I saw some stuff about the National Amateur Cup. So another thing we're going to be looking forward to in 2026. It doesn't actually take place till the summer, but each of the regions have to do their qualifying tournaments. And already Region 1, Region 1 is so far ahead of everybody else in terms of amateur soccer and the structure. And part of that is the significantly longer history they have had in soccer and leagues and everything else and tournaments that they've been playing for scores of years. But they've already nearly got all their finalists set for the Region 1 tournament. And I remember last year for Region 4, which is where we're part of, like in May, somewhere, like, oh, get your applications and pay your money if you want to be part of the final tournament. And we didn't even know who it was. And like right before the last weekend, like, oh, here are the teams that are playing over this weekend, and we'll have someone representing Region 4. And I really wish that Region 4 on the amateur side, that we could get to a point where we have better structure like they do. I envy every time I read and I see what's going on in Region 1. I see what's going on with the APSL and the promotion relegation they have down through all their different leagues, down into, say, the Cosmopolitan League there in New York. It just, and what they have going in around New Jersey and Pennsylvania, it just, like, I envy that. I would so much like to see a regional structure like that take place here in San Diego. Or in Southern California, we have so many teams that are all playing in various leagues without any unifying structure, that it's really, really frustrating. And anyway, the story is, be on the lookout for the Amateur Cup information coming up, and we'll kind of follow some of these teams that have made it. And again, that's a step to qualify to the US Open Cup, which we're going to talk about in a second, but I'll let you jump in if you have any comments about the National Amateur Cup here.
No, not particularly. I guess I'm not surprised that, the New England area has, like you said, the history really, if nothing else, to kind of bolster the modern setup there.
Yeah. Well, and then let's jump into the Open Cup, because they announced, US Soccer did, their format, dates, everything else for the US Open Cup. And the biggest news, and probably the news that people are terribly upset about, I would say kind of across the board are upset about, is the US Soccer's decision, which, goes against the original professional league standards, which I don't know if those have formally been changed, because if you are part of these leagues, you're supposed to play in any domestic cups, but now US Soccer has decided that only 16 professional teams are going to represent each level, like Division 1, Division 2, and Division 3. So 16 teams will come from Major League Soccer, since that's our only Division 1 men's league. And then we actually are going to get 17 teams, I think, from the championship, just because there was an extra berth there somewhere. So 17 teams from USL Championship, and then 15 teams from Division 3, which would be 2 independent MLS Next Pro teams, and all 13 of last year's League 1 teams from USL. So all the new teams that are either moving up or, coming into Division 3, Division 3, USL League 1. Historically, they all got to be automatically part of the tournament. You didn't have to qualify, because we start bringing in our professional teams. But now none of those new teams get in this year. All the League 1 teams from this past year did, so all 13 of them, because remember, Texoma self-relegated back to USL 2, because there were 14 teams for the season in League 1. But in the championship, where there's 24 teams, right, seven teams don't make it into the US Open Cup. Like they are now screwed out of being a participant in the US Open Cup, which for some of these organizations and some of these professional teams, this is the big tournament. This is your chance to get in there and not only compete against other people at your level, but get the opportunity to compete against people at the Division One level. And you don't get that now. And one of those teams, I believe, is the closest one to us, Orange County. I think they're out. I don't think they made it in to get a berth. Monterey Bay, I think, was one of the other ones that didn't get a berth. What are your thoughts about this change on U.S. soccer side to limit the number of professional teams to participate in the tournament?
I mean, I don't like it. I don't like that not all of our professional teams will be involved. It feels like the U.S. Federation is maybe accepting that the U.S. Open Cup is just going to kind of take a back seat, if not just fully go away. My hope would be that this is just a step towards restructuring to get in line with the new MLS schedule. That seems a bit optimistic, though. I'm not realistically expecting that that's the case. So I don't know. I don't like it, and I'm a little unsure about what it indicates for the future.
Yeah, and if it's, if this is the way the future is going to be and people know ahead of time that where I place in the league is also going to determine whether or not I qualify for the US Open Cup, if that's known ahead of time, that's one thing. But these decisions that are made or announced in the off season, I really not happy. Not so much about there only being 16 teams. Like you said, maybe there's a bigger thing at play, but that hasn't been communicated if there is. And to kind of make that decision when no one knows it, and people who thought or maybe were planning for US Open Cup are now just out, not by anything necessarily that they did or that they were aware of. So I'm not happy about that at all. But I also, as a side note, if we go back and kind of bring this to MLS, there's 27 American teams because 3 of them are Canadian, right? So there's 27 American teams. I forget how many total are in the CONCACAF Champions Cup, but I believe it's 7 out of MLS. So 7 U.S. teams in the CONCACAF Champions Cup. So they were also excluded from the U.S. Open Cup. And per the instructions that were given by U.S. Soccer, or whatever the agreement was, it was teams that participate in the Open Cup, then Leagues Cup, and CONCACAF Champions Cup would be excluded, and Leagues Cup would be excluded, and then everybody else in would be available, or the other 16 teams or top 16 teams, whatever it was, would be available to the Open Cup. But that math doesn't really math for the Leagues Cup, because if you've got 3 Canadian teams, brings you down to 27. If you have 7 teams in the CONCACAF Champions Cup, that brings you down to 20, and or maybe it was 8 teams, brings you down to 19. You got 16 teams in the US Open Cup, that leaves 3 teams. And if I looked at things correctly, I think it's just FC Dallas, Real Salt Lake, and Portland that don't have anything. So are those the only 3 teams? Like, there's going to be a super slimmed down Leagues Cup, or is the Leagues Cup gone finally? Is that what this actually mean, without anybody making an announcement, that there actually is no Leagues Cup? That's what I haven't been able to hear from anyone, but kind of reading between the lines, if the qualification as stated was CONCACAF Champions Cup, then Leagues Cup, then you get down to the next people for the Open Cup, and you're already taking all your people right after your CONCACAF Champions League or Champions Cup people, and there's 3 teams left. My gut feeling is there's no more Leagues Cup.
Yeah, it is weird. We haven't heard anything about it yet.
And I don't have a problem with no more Leagues Cup.
No, not at all.
I actually hope it is long gone.
It would be hard to see them just not doing it ever again without saying anything about it, but it is weird that we've not heard anything at this point. I feel like in the past couple of years that by December we've gotten info about the following year's tournament.
Yes, I agree. So we'll We'll see. And plus, with the new format of the US Open Cup, because they've gone down teams and what they've had before, we actually have one fewer round. So there's going to be 7 total rounds instead of 8. I don't remember the dates and how that works out, but the initial rounds that we normally have, say in March and April, should be basically the same. I think we are finishing up the tournament a little faster, or I can't remember if we had. I think we did have a round in the summer, so maybe that round that was in the summer is just being skipped over, from when the World Cup is being played. And maybe that's part of it this year. Maybe with the World Cup that was part of the decision. But no one said that. Right? That information's not communicated. It's just like, okay, here we go. And sorry, especially USL championship teams, you are out of luck if you didn't finish high enough in your table to get a berth.
Yeah, like you said, it's kind of hard when they're making these decisions after the season's finished because, various clubs might value this differently, right? Like I'm sure Timbers fans are not happy to be not participating in this. So it's a little frustrating that they didn't really have any chance on the field to affect that outcome.
Yeah. Well, and then the last bit of, I'm hoping, good news, really depends in our soccer wars and our league versus league situation, but it was announced, I think today, it was today or yesterday, that the League for Clubs, the brand new league that started last year, most of the teams came from the NPSL, were unhappy with the way that league was run. Key people started a brand new league. They had 47 teams, I think, join them their very first year. They've already started making announcements for new teams that are joining them for the 2026 season. Their summer league, like most of our pre-professional leagues. But they just announced today a new Pro-Am league that they are starting in 2027 to help bridge the gap between adult amateur and Division III professional, to try to be that true Division IV kind of league. Now, we've had people do this before. This was the whole, NISA itself was Division III, but you had the NISA Nation idea. They were trying to also build and bridge that gap. So it looks like the League for Clubs is trying to fill the niche that, I know technically NISA is still around, but fill that niche that NISA vacated because they were poorly run. But the League for Clubs has that same independent kind of idea in the way they're run. If you are a team within a particular league, you kind of have a share of that league and you help run the league. All the ownership groups help run the league like you typically see around most of the world. So this is going to be interesting. 2027, that's a short turnaround. The proposed schedule I saw was our traditional year kind of schedule is April to October. So an extended league season rather than the shorter 3-month summer league, but still one that plays through the summer, which also what I read was that was kind of the proposed, but it wasn't set in stone that it was going to be that time frame, because I think it's probably going to depend on whether college soccer goes year round, on USL if it decides to switch its calendar or not. We know MLS is switching its calendars, so probably just trying to figure out, I don't know which way they are going to land in terms of calendar, and whether they fill that gap. Because again, based on, I think, the numbers they put out, but I know some numbers I've seen recently that if you're a competitive adult amateur team looking maybe to move up, your annual budget is probably around $200,000. But if you want to jump to, say, Division III, you probably need an annual budget of at least $5 million. And that is just too big of a jump for most teams to realistically make. So I don't know, what are your thoughts, again, about another league trying to create, in this case, a true Division IV, something that sits below Division III and above all the other amateur leagues that are currently out there right now.
I mean, I like it. I've talked several times about how, despite the chaos of NISA, I really thought NISA Nation was very much a large step in the right direction for amateur and pre-professional soccer in the United States. So I'm glad to see someone else taking up that mantle, someone else who seems to be much better run. Um, and yeah, it's a niche that needs to be filled, and it's a really important one. It's one of those things where the average soccer fan isn't going to like notice the difference once you have this really coherent kind of fourth division, but you would notice it if it weren't there. It provides that real bridge structure, like you said, and kind of ties everything together. And so I'm glad to see somebody focusing on that niche. And it's not that different from how it all happened in England. You had the conference or whatever it used to be called, and kind of merging with the football league to create this structure. So it's totally on par with how the world's done it. And I think, it's good to have somebody that is their focus. I think that will
Right.
yield better results.
And I think that's been part of our problem. Well, I mean, it's a fundamental problem with the way our structure is. You have something like MLS that is not willing to do promotion relegation, so it forces anybody else who wants to create some kind of structure, either you settle for being the tier below, or like USL is doing, we want to encompass 3 levels or maybe more. They haven't said really where they want to be. But what we need to do is get, and they're going to have to do it on their own because it's not going to come from US Soccer, but we need to get people working together within the league. I think as soon as 2 leagues can kind of partner in a way that's like, great, you take over this part and we can do promotion relegation here, then then you start to have a system you can start building upon. When you have, and that you agree to work like, yeah, we're going to be at this level and we're going to feed into you, and some of your teams will drop back down into us, so we keep both our leagues going, but we kind of know, as a league where we're going to be, and allow the teams to move again like the rest of the world does. That will be nice. I don't know how many attempts this is, but I think, again, if you really go back and look at the history of, even in England, there were all kinds of leagues that started up and failed and started up and failed that were below whatever the top league was at any given time, or the cutoff where promotion and relegation ended and you had to be voted in. Right? So kind of keep filling in that structure underneath is really what we need to do in this country. So I applaud a group like the League for Clubs trying to do this. I just fear, I don't know, does this inspire UPSL to try to do their own semi-pro version? So now we're competing against each other because people aren't working together. We have so many potential good teams and ownership groups that if we just get a structure for the lower leagues, or even for US Soccer to step in more at the truly amateur level and help organize things, it would go a long way to help have a pathway that you could move as a team and work your way up and show your growth, and eventually maybe get into one of those professional leagues.
Well, I mean, we've talked about this several times, but that really is the key issue, that the U.S. Soccer Federation just pretty much wholly abdicates their role as a governing body of domestic soccer. It's pretty much just like, it makes it makes laissez-faire capitalism seem like kind of socialist. They really just like fucking let them do whatever they want.
And I know full well that we have some different legal structures in our country that other countries don't have. And we do not treat our sports the same way other countries do, where they have a minister of culture or sport. So we do have some structural differences that we have to work within. And certainly any league could say, no, I don't want to participate. But I would think, rather than US Soccer mandating something to happen, that they are aggressively trying to get people to work together and help shape something, mediating within there to help get something moving forward, even, as opposed to dictating something. But that's just,
Well, to
that
be
just
clear, I
hasn't
don't
been
even
what our
mean
U.S. soccer has done.
I don't even mean that U.S. soccer has to dictate to these leagues what they would do, though I don't know that I would necessarily take issue with that. But yeah, like you said, just make them all sit down and like say to them, "There's one pyramid, one accreditation for this pyramid. You all have to fucking get in the room, figure it out." Like, just I don't care who started it. I'm ending it. Type energy.
Yeah.
That's all they need to do.
And I think you could do that. Say, if you want to be part of this pyramid structure, we're setting the parameters to be part of that. You could do your own league outside of if you want. But if you want to be part of the pyramid structure, then here's what's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. I am not the legal expert, but I feel like there ought to be a pathway there where it could be done. Not that you force someone like MLS to be in there. However, if you provide a structure where everybody else gets involved and it starts to become successful, I think the owners of Major League Soccer would realize that they're quickly going to be on the outs if they're not a part of it.
Yeah.
But that's, again, it's like we say a lot of times with the things we talk about here, that's a lot of ifs and, need a lot of other things to happen to make that, especially some people with stronger leadership skills in U.S. soccer in this area of trying to build a more cohesive pyramid. It just doesn't seem to be the desire.
No, it doesn't.
Not of the people who are there now. Okay, that's it for our current events, which took up a good chunk of our show here. So let's get quickly into our main topic, and we probably won't dive into MLS too much here, but we're going to look at MLS, NWSL, and USL, and try to look at maybe some of the key issues that are likely going to affect them over the next couple of years in terms of growth as a league, but specifically in terms of player welfare and player compensation, work environments, and any of those kinds of things. Because I don't think, let's start with MLS. I don't think MLS really needs to worry about stadium issues, their general ownership issues, everything else. The thing I think in MLS 3.0 also will help them grow is they've got to change some of their structure within their teams. Now, I would love for them to get rid of single entity, but that's probably further down the road. But for individual teams, this TAM, this GAM, all these other things, like they really need to, I'll say, loosen the structure to allow teams to be able to get maybe some of the players they want. That's one thing, but also I really think the MLS Players Association, this is going to be a theme that we'll see through all the leagues, is they need to advocate a lot harder for stronger floors, right? The low end of what people are making. Because I don't know what it is in MLS right now. Maybe I did bring it up here. No, I didn't for MLS. I don't know what their current minimum salary is for Major League Soccer, but we did have Don Garber say in this state of the league that we just had that MLS knows they need to start loosening the roster rules. And, the question was asked, how far are you willing to go? And Don Garber basically said something to the effect of, we're going to do whatever it takes to help, better shape and define our future, which is a bit of a word salad. But again, it was one of the few times where the wording to me seemed hopeful that change is coming, just like the calendar change, rather than shutting down, like talking about markets and talking about all this. And, we go through strict controls and we look through all this stuff. But basically, again, more word salad for how we're not doing anything. This seemed to be word salad more in like, yeah, expect to see some changes coming up soon. We think we're ready to move in that direction.
Well, that's exciting.
That was brief.
Yeah. Well, I like I said, remain eternally skeptical of Don Garber. So
Yeah.
I'm not getting my hopes up, but it's good to hear.
But again, maybe with this MOS 3.0, they are finally at the point 30 years in where they are able to start getting rid of some of the guardrails and having their teams behave, I'll say, more independently, and get a little more in line with the way the rest of the world does things. But again, it's taken them 30 years to get to this point, for better or for worse. It's taken them that long. But let's then, I mean, there's some hopeful signs in Major League Soccer right now. If we switch over to the NWSL, they're having some very serious, a dozen years into the league, some serious issues in terms of player contracts and what they can do. They got rid of the draft, which I think was actually great. I know there has been, that I have read some internal conversations and anonymous sources saying that it has hurt some teams because there's no draft. Things aren't just kind of handed to you where you could go in and you get a pick. Like, you have to work harder to get players. Yeah.
Those poor clubs.
I know. But they do have in their CBA and NWSL a minimum salary. In 2025, it was $48,500, which, I'm sorry, and it will be going up. I think it goes up to a little over 50,000 next year, and eventually by 2030, it's going to go up to 82,000. I don't know what inflation and everything else is going to be by the time we get to 2030, but these are pretty low, I think, for a Division I league anywhere. Now, maybe it's not around the rest of the world, and maybe it's not for women's sports, but it ought to be. Like that, 48,000, I think 48,000, like, I'm not sure in San Diego how much you could do with $48,000 salary.
No.
In terms of living somewhere. Yeah.
I think realistically, the club is probably helping those minimum salary players with, housing accommodations and things like that.
Could be. And that can be part of overall compensation. I have no problem with that.
No.
And if you're providing meals and doing other things, if you have a good training facility, I think those are all things clubs should be doing. Like that, you should be taking care of your players. But I think NWSL is at a tricky spot right now. And this Trinity Rodman situation, unless something got resolved in the last few hours today, it is going to be, it's going to set a precedent one way or the other, right? So it is already precedent setting. It just depends which way it ultimately plays out, but it is going to have ripple effects, however this thing plays out. And I think that the NWSL are running the risk of losing out their top league status, because they're not treating their players well enough.
No, they're not.
I mean, that's the bottom line.
I saw, I don't remember where I saw this, but somebody made a good point that the more the top player or players in MLS go to Europe or wherever, mostly Europe, for more money. So you had Naomi Girma a couple years ago, and now it's looking like Trinity Rodman might make her way over to Europe too, to get paid what she's owed, what she's due, really, like what she's worth. The more your top players are leaving for other leagues, even if it's only a handful of clubs in those leagues, your Chelsea's, Arsenal's, Barcelona's, Real Madrid's, that are even paying these players, even if it's only a handful of them, every time it more and more normalizes the idea that your best players have to leave to achieve their top level. And if you're letting Trinity Rodman walk because the commissioner literally told her, no, you can't make more money, like that is a big domino in that line, I think. And I personally, I think the NWSL is probably in 10 years' time not going to be the top women's league in the world anyway, just because of the, some of the current salary constrictions, but also just kind of the way Americans do sports. We don't, like, even if they expand the salary cap and all that, I still think your Chelseas and Arsenals of the world are still going to be able to poach the best players. So I think that
Yeah.
maybe is an inevitability, but allowing players like Trinity Rodman to walk just out of sheer stubbornness is absolutely accelerating that dynamic.
Well, and if the information that I read or that I'm remembering is correct, that there was a contract negotiated with the Spirit,
Well, right, and
and
the commissioner told them no. I saw.
right, told them no because it partially hinged on, a revised, better television contract in a couple of years, and the commissioner said no, but the Spirit were willing to do it, and partly, I mean, I get it a little bit as a league, but partly that's a little bit on the Spirit as to, like, if there's a salary cap and you're willing to do this and pay this player more money to keep this player, you're going to have to make adjustments in the rest of your team. And they seemed willing to do this. But also, it's sidestepping that slightly. From my understanding, the league could at any time up the salary cap as well. They could unilaterally up the salary cap. That, my understanding, is part of the CBA. Will they do this? Probably not. And, I think also, again, to do another slight sidestep, I think too many times we focus on the top player and who's making the most money. In this case, potentially Trinity Rodman, or she might leave and go somewhere else. And we lose sight sometimes of the bottom end. And I like that NWSL has a minimum base salary, and it's supposed to scale up over the next few years. I hope in the next CBA, or they're already working on other things to get that up even higher. Make sure you've got medical expenses. They've already got basically their free agency and other things worked in. But I really think, if you want to be a top league, you also need to have a collective bargaining agreement that takes care of your players, and all of your players, not just your players at the top end of the table.
Agreed.
And that is the single biggest thing that's going to help. And if you do that, I think it goes back to this idea that Jessica Berman said in another interview, something to the effect of, we're not really concerned about people going to Europe because people really want to come to the US. Like, they're willing to take a slightly lower salary to be in our league, to be in our country, and so forth. And that, might be true, and might be true in the moment, but a bit presumptuous. And, that is going to continue forever. And also is a bit insulting, I think, to all the players if you're like, well, yeah, people will stay. They'll stay here for less money. We're not willing to pay you what you're worth because we know you'll stay. You'd rather be here. I think ultimately that message gets out to players, and players who might have stayed before to help the league grow now become, I'll say, more selfish, right? It's like, okay, I'm not doing that, and then you start driving up prices, or then you let people go somewhere else, and to Europe somewhere, or to the Super League. I mean, there's owners in the Super League who could, because they don't have a salary cap in the Super League, who could afford to pay. And I think all it could take is a Trinity Rodman to go there to lead a little bit of an exodus of people, if they're willing to pay. Now, where does that put the Super League? Is that going to make them be like the NASL and spend themselves into oblivion and die off in a few years? Possibly. But for NWSL, they are in the league is in a spot where I think there's lots of ways to win and be successful, and they seem to be finding the way to be the least successful in this entire negotiation.
Yeah. Agreed. That's a good way to put it. Yeah, I hadn't heard that whoever it was that said, like, oh, players will just come here. That is a bit presumptuous, and I think, the immediate future for like disadvantaged groups in the United States is maybe a little more in jeopardy than it's ever been.
Yeah.
And I, especially in the NWSL, larger than your average sports league number of those people identify as, LGBTQ plus, something like that. Um, so I think it's like you said, I think it's kind of an insulting assumption that people would just stay here for less money, when they could, make more money and have more rights and play at more prestigious clubs and in
Yeah.
these historic cities. Like, it just, that math ain't mathin' to me.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see how some of these things play
Oh, sorry.
out.
I
Yeah.
wanted to say too, just on the topic of I forgot the players, taking the hit to help the league. Fuck that. Companies will throw you out like the second they don't believe you're useful anymore. And I know that is more advice from the business world, but that goes for sports too. Um, Careers in athletes terms are incredibly short,
Short. Yeah.
very short. If you are willing to take a few years out of your professional career to make way less money to help some ideological project of this league that isn't going to care about you when you're gone, whatever, that's noble, I guess. But I would encourage those women to go get their bag, somewhere else, because again, these careers are super fucking short. And in 20 years, if the NWSL is better off because of your sacrifice, guess who's going to remember your sacrifice? Literally nobody.
Yeah. Yeah. We had a saying in my teaching profession is you may love your job, which most teachers do, but the job doesn't love you back.
Yep.
And
The
I
loyalty
can
only
say
cuts
that
one way.
about most jobs, and management, ownership, whatever, will take advantage of that. In teaching, I'd see that all the time. I think we see that with these professional athletes.
Mm-hmm.
You get the chance to play the sport you love as a kid and keep doing it. So, you know, you ought to be able, you have a special thing that most people don't ever get to do. So you ought to be happy that you have a place to be able to do it rather than, being paid professionally as professional athletes.
Well, and not to get too far down this tangent, but that's super condescending too, because I mean, it is true in every industry that the laborers are the one who create the actual value, right? But that is more acutely and obviously true in sports than it is in really any other industry. The idea that players should be grateful to hand over the heaps of money that they are creating to people who haven't done anything is actually very insulting, I would say.
Yeah.
And I know that that's not a novel thing for me to say, but it's just every time someone trots out that argument, it my jaw drops. It's just
Yeah.
so stupid.
Right. And then let's switch over to USL. We kind of covered the USL Super League in our conversation with the NWSL, but and just as a note, my best understanding is, except for the top players, a lot of the rest of the players are getting similar salaries between the Super League and the NWSL.
Yes. Well, that's why the Super League, that was their singular stated reason for going D1 over D2 was there's really not any room under the D1 pay scale to pay people and still call it professional.
Right. Because you're not people will need another job and everything. Yeah. So if we go on the men's side in USL, if these numbers are correct that I have, I when I just did quick cursory digging, I found that on the low end in the championship, some players, they earn about $27,000 a season. I'll say a year, but a season, and that's probably, like we said, with some housing tossed in.
Right.
And
That's
other things.
that's salary pre housing, whatever. And I'm not justifying it, just clarifying.
Right. But this is Division Two, and that's, to me, as a floor, that has to improve. We understand, maybe not better for those of us who've been paying attention, but you understand why the players came out in the championship game with their t-shirts, and that basically professional standards for players before we start thinking about pro rel or Division One. And this is one of those things. If your CBA right now is 27,004, then that's not really going to cut it moving forward. Now, if I noticed correctly, you sent me something during the show here
I did.
as a
Yes.
text. Did that just come out today, or did I miss
Well,
that somewhere?
it's the article, the ESPN article was about an hour old when I saw it. I just somebody
Okay.
texted it to me, so it looks like a proposal from the USLPA for a minimum salary of the new D1 league starting in 2028 of $55,000 a year. That's salary pre like housing, healthcare, anything like that.
Yeah.
With it set to rise to around 80,000 by 2031, I think it was. And so that's obviously D1. I very quickly skimmed the article, didn't see any specific numbers about Championship or League One, but you would have to assume that that is, some sort of gradation down from there.
Right. Yeah. So here are my initial thoughts. My very first thought, great, an increase. But my
Mhm.
second super initial thought immediately after that is that should be your D3 level.
Yeah.
Seriously. That if you're still going to call your Division 3 professional, meaning this is something, this is your job, you could help support your family on this. You don't need a second job. If you're saying 55 is going to be D1 and maybe you're still talking 27, 30,000 for D2, then where's D3? Like that's not a professional salary.
Yeah.
You can't really call yourself a professional division. Pre-professional, maybe amateur, people who are still trying to get their break into be on the professional side. But if it's going to be professional, that 55-ish as the basic minimum floor, like that's got to be your D3. I mean, really, that has to be, and you scale up from there. Now, I understand expenses, everything else, but you're never going to have, or I'll say the USL, strong leagues that, and attract and keep good players unless you pay them well enough. Now in the championship, some players are getting more than $100,000 in salary, and that's fine. There's players that will make more. There has to be a floor, and that floor has to get you out of poverty level. Seriously, you can't have a floor that keeps you underneath the poverty line. And, this a side note, we've talked about these issues before, and USL needs to have better standards across their teams, that if they're going to be a D1 team and in their D1 league, I mean, to me, the US soccer D1 standards are less important to me than what USL is going to impose for D1 standards. And I would hope they would do things like, what's the match day experience going to be like? How do you take care of your players? Because that's got to be huge. Or you're not going to keep players around. And or some of the potential pool of players we have out there, we're going to lose because they're not going to want to play for that amount of money. But yeah, there needs to be some better. If you're going to supply housing or do some kind of housing benefit, then there's some kind of minimum standard there. If it's not part of your salary, then you're covering this much. Whether you're providing meals or not, what the transportation is like. I mean, there have to be some additional standards other than just pay that you're doing.
Right.
And medical, right? Medical's the biggest thing probably for everyone.
That is a really good example of why when people talk about wanting to keep politics separate from sports, that's kind of just a silly thing to say. Like that the healthcare is a really good example. These players on lower salaries, like a single payer nationwide healthcare system would be transformative to the way that these lower division clubs could compensate their players. And so it's not just
to
like
any business.
Right.
Any
it's not just
business.
like people want free stuff. It would literally transform the economy. But again, this is not a politics podcast. So.
Yeah. Yeah. So as I know we've gone 90 minutes here, so we need to start wrapping things up. But to me, as I look ahead to 2026 with the World Cup coming and everybody's, what's going to be the impact? I don't know that this World Cup is going to have an impact in the same way the 94 one. I
No,
think the
it won't.
94 World Cup was more about generating interest in viewers. It was an event. People enjoyed it. We started a new men's professional league. On the heels of that, we had a women's team also competing and winning World Cup as well. So I think that 90s period really was transformative. Plus, with the internet, I think you cannot two things: the internet, the ability to get information from around the world, and not just rely on whatever's happening on your local linear channels. And two, FIFA, the game, right? I think that opened people's eyes up to so many things about the culture and soccer and how it worked in other worlds. The internet allowed you to actually go and search and find other things. Those things combined with the way our national teams did on an international stage, all that stuff there in the 90s really helped generate interest, more viewer kind of interest in the sport of soccer. MLS has grown through all of those. I think this time around with the World Cup itself, I think will have less of an impact. And I think that's for a variety of reasons that are just, happening at the national level and happening at FIFA, and how we won't get huge sums of money from the World Cup because we are not organizing it. We're just hosting it. FIFA is basically, sucking everything dry in terms of money. But I really think we're at a pivotal moment in our sport of soccer in this country, and whether you focus on MLS and 3.0 or whatever, but we have a stable it seems like stable women's leagues at high levels. We have stable first division men's league. We've had a stable second and third division men's league. I think this era of professionalism across both the men's side and the women's side is going to be the fundamental change over this next year, because yes, the World Cup's going to come. We had the Club World Cup. People are going to see high level players. And I think there's also going to be an understanding of more people saying, we want that here.
Yeah.
And if we want that here, it isn't just bringing over a Messi to play for one team. It's building our infrastructure better, top to bottom, to have, a full pyramid on both genders, and treat people like professional athletes. And I think if that happens, if we really do make that switch, then what happens at the top end will end up taking care of itself.
Yeah.
Because especially if I know we're both big pro rel people, but if you institute something like pro rel and you have the structure to do it, then the desire for some clubs to stay and be at the top will force them to keep innovating and keep investing. And that will have your top division keep improving over time in a way that you will not be able to do if you try to force everyone ahead of time, like MLS has done. 30 years, we have better quality of play on the field. We've got some better ownership groups. We have the soccer stadia. It feels like a proper soccer league in that sense. But it's taken us 30 years of fits and starts and going through stuff and finding the right billionaire to come join the particular league. And we lost sight of growing our structure. And again, I always bring it up. I think Japan is a great parallel where they built the structure and focused on the structure that will help their national teams and their entire pyramid. And I think they are so much further along than we are as a much smaller country. And you see it in their competitive play at the international level as well. And our position to really take advantage of all the groundwork they've laid down over the last 30 years, where we focused on just Major League Soccer and not anything, and maybe the NWSL, but certainly not to the same extent that we, from US soccer standpoint, devoted so much energy into MLS.
Yeah, and on the point of Japan, we talked a lot about how building out the pyramid really is good for the national team in the long run. A lot of people who I consider to be like good analysts of the game have pointed to Japan and said, watch this space for the next 10, 15 years, that national team is going to start doing things because they're finally reaping the rewards of a nationwide system that actually is meritorious and elevates the most successful players. And yeah, I think Japan is going to enter a golden era that is almost, you could really draw a direct line between that 30-year plan and where they are now. And so I hope, I don't have a lot of faith, but I hope that America can look at that and realize that the long-term vision is what yields those results. There's no quick fix.
Yeah, I agree. But, one of the other things we learned from Japan, you can make changes pretty fast if you have a plan.
Right.
You have a plan and everybody buys into it, and you really have a focus for where you want to go, which is something we haven't had. Not a unified country-wide plan. Right. All right, Dylan, I think we'll leave it there. We're going a little bit long, so we're going to wrap this episode up. Looking ahead, any particular soccer plans you have for the week?
Just keeping up with European leagues and whatnot. A lot of them are hitting their winter breaks, but the Premier League does ramp up for their winter. I know the MASL just got started. Saw the Sockers had a rough first game, but I'll definitely try to tune into some of those. It looks like they're on Victory Plus, which is an streaming app that a lot of the NHL games have been on. So I don't know. I think it's free, so I might try and check that out.
All right, I'll have to look into that as well. Not a game specifically, but the USL should be, I think, this week coming up, or Thursday coming up, just a couple of days from when we're recording this. Home openers, and I think the Jägermeister Cup dates should be coming out this week. So, and I think the full schedules are coming out the next week. So we should have some good ideas again if there's going to be any kind of format change in terms of like an East and a West, or however they're organizing things, and how they're going to group the Jägermeister Cup with all the new teams in League One.
Yeah,
so I'm looking forward to that, to start making some plans for 2026.
Definitely.
And then I can't remember if I mentioned this last show or not, but high school soccer is starting back up again in earnest here. So usually we come back from Thanksgiving break, really things start kicking into gear. We get into our Christmas tournaments, and then most of the league play, I think some matches, if I remember correctly from my high school coaching days, might start before you go to winter break, but definitely when you come back afterwards, you hit strong into your league play. And I might try to get out and see some leagues. A couple of my high schools that are nearby me are in the open division and are ranked very high, and might catch some top level games if I can find some that work out for me, my schedule. And I would encourage, like we're always talking about, supporting local soccer, right? This is another way to do it. So if you got a local high school near you, go ahead and check out when they're playing, see what leagues and stuff they're playing in. And for those who don't know, and I can't remember how long we've been doing it, feels like for about 20 years, but we do a form of promotion relegation with all our high school sports here in San Diego. So depending how you finish 1 year is going to determine whether you move up or move down a division. It hasn't been based on school size in a very long time. So this, I also think, is another reason why people are very comfortable in a lot of areas of the country with this idea of promotion relegation. People live it in all kinds of areas. It's not completely foreign to people.
Well, and I think it also just makes sense. Like if you buy into the idea, and I'm not saying I do necessarily, but if you buy into the idea that America is a meritorious society, one that elevates good ideas and success, like pro rel is like the most naturally obvious extension of that. So yeah, I really don't think Americans would have a hard time with it. I just think that they don't even know it could be a thing, you know?
Yeah. We'll see. Anyway, Dylan, thank you. That wraps up another episode for us for the LGS pod. We'd like to hear your thoughts, if you have any, about especially professional standards, where they might be headed, what some of our leagues should do to help strengthen their leagues, really take care of their players and improve the overall quality of our soccer ecosystem here in not just California, in the United States. But feel free to comment here on our YouTube channel. You can drop us a note over at Blue Sky. We're at soccershorts.bigpinedigital.com. You can also send us a text if you're listening to us on a podcasting app. Go into the description and click on the link at the very top that says send us a text and drop us your comments there. Or, of course, you can always join us live at 6 o'clock on Tuesdays. At 6 o'clock Pacific time on Tuesdays is when we usually record our live stream. All right, Dylan, any comments before we head out?
Nope, just happy holidays, everyone. I guess we'll do one more show before we sign off for the year. But yeah, like I said, it's like the Friday of the year. I'm not even like a religious person or anything, but I really like this time of year just because it feels like everybody stops hustling for a month and kicks back and enjoys their families and whatnot. And I really just enjoy that.
It's well said. And our next week will be our last show of the year. That will be our True Friday.
Yes.
And then we'll have our weekend for a couple of weeks before we kick back up when we come back in January. All right, everyone. Thank you for joining in for another episode of the LGS Pod, and we will see everyone again next week. Good night.